hello everyone, and welcome to the HODLCast. Today is Sunday, May 17th, and we have very special guest, attorney Rafael Yakobi. Rafael and I recently wrote an article for Bitcoin Magazine together, and we've been in a Telegram group for a little while. It's kind of how we got to know each other. But Rafael, thank you so much for taking the time today. And can you introduce yourself and maybe explain how you got involved in this niche area of Bitcoin law?
Sure. Thank you for having me. Yes, and I recommend that anyone who's listening read our article. We put a lot of work into it, and I think it's a good written background on some of the topics that I think we'll cover today. So in terms of how I got into crypto or Bitcoin law, I'd been interested in Bitcoin for quite a while, on and off, a little bit here and there since 2013. I was in law school at the time, didn't really have any money, but I, got in because it was exciting and heard about it from the Silk Road, and just kind of being a libertarian on the internet, it's something that you'll probably come across. Now everyone knows about it, but even back then it was something that, was pretty frequent, and it was kind of like an interesting internet tool. The sound money value proposition or investment proposition wasn't as clear, at least not at all clear to me back then. It was more like a useful tool for having some freedom on the internet. And so I got interested in it back then. And then a couple of years later, I in law school, I had kind of introduced Bitcoin to another classmate of mine. We graduated together, and he ended up building a website, which is now the Crypto Lawyers, my law firm's website. And he built the website kind of as an experiment because we were both interested in the area, and people just started emailing. And then, he asked me to do it with him, and I was apprehensive because it wasn't at all obvious what, we both like crypto and Bitcoin, but who knows what the law is, right? That was my initial reaction, was what exactly am I supposed to do for these people, And then after we got into it a little bit further, we realized that people just want lawyers to do regular lawyer things for the most part, but it helps if they can understand the subject matter, right, from a user's perspective or things like that. So we kind of just tried it out, and there was a need for securities lawyers, and I was doing securities litigation, and then it kind of evolved from there. So we adjusted with the market, and it's worked out really well. I haven't done a billable minute of non-crypto work since we started the firm in early 2018.
Oh, awesome. That's kind of similar to how I got into it as well. It just, there's definitely a need in the space for attorneys, and it's a fun area to practice in, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Or when I say fun, I guess it's an innovative area because things are, ever changing.
Agreed.
But and you've become quite a Bitcoin privacy proponent. Can you explain a little bit why Bitcoin privacy matters?
Sure. I think Bitcoin privacy is important primarily as just for safety purposes. I mean, I think that's the most important reason, that given that Bitcoin has, a public ledger where you can see the transactions, you need to be able to control what information you share with your counterparties when you transact with them. And so if you always use the same address or something like that, and you also store all your Bitcoin in the same address all the time, you're effectively sharing your balance and all your transaction history and your future transactions with everyone that you interact with. And if Bitcoin is to be money, that's not an ideal way to do things. And you can see that from the real world as well. You don't want to stop in a convenience store, and let's say you're in a bad area and you stop in a store and you want to buy some water or a snack or something, and then you swipe your card and they see, oh, this guy's got $7.5 million, right? That would be an awkward situation to be in, and could even put you in danger. It's not as much of an issue in the United States, fortunately, but there has been people who have been kidnapped and put under pressure, tortured, things like that in other countries to get their Bitcoin. And because Bitcoin is a self-custodial asset, you have to take the responsibility of this. And so I think safety is the main issue. but just as a matter of, basic civil rights and having the ability to do what you want to do with your money, or do what you want to do with your, computer without having complete surveillance over it. It's just, if you're going to have freedom, you need to have some level of privacy. So I think that, for me at least, those are the reasons why it's important. Yeah, I think safety is really, really at the core, and that can be from, criminals, it could be from governments, but that's my personal reason why I think it's important.
Agreed. Yeah, great answer there. And so when you and I were writing our article, we were focused on the Helix case, which I'll just give a brief overview. I know you know the details inside and out, but for those listening, it was a case where there was a 3-count indictment. It happened on February 11th, and it was in the District of Columbia. The defendant is Larry Harmon, a 36-year-old from Ohio. He was charged with money laundering, conspiracy, operating an unlicensed money transmitting business, and conducting money transmission without a DC license. So, we kind of broke always the money laundering and unlicensed money transmission charges seem to go hand in hand. So, let's maybe break down, like, what is FinCEN, a FinCEN exchanger, and what does one of those, if you are a FinCEN exchanger, what do you need to do?
Sure. So just to give context for, I don't know what exactly the demographics of who listens, but FinCEN is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, right, which is a federal government agency that is tasked with preventing money laundering. That's their primary focus. Whereas, the states are generally more interested in consumer protection when they deal with money transmission. So FinCEN has certain kinds of classifications that if your activities or your business falls into those classifications, then you're required to register with FinCEN, and then you have to comply with the Bank Secrecy Act. And so, I'm just going to paraphrase here, but essentially if you're accepting and transmitting money on behalf of others, or exchanging currencies, then you're probably going to fall within one of FinCEN's definitions as, an exchanger. And this makes you effectively a financial institution, by the broader definition under federal law. And so once you're a financial institution, you've got certain obligations that you're expected to fulfill, commonly referred to as KYC and AML.
Mm-hmm. And in the case that we were looking at with Helix, so they were running a custodial mixing service, which meant they were taking, and most of their transactions, which was 350,000 Bitcoin valued at 300 million, that was transacted between 2014 and 2017. Most of it came from Alpha Bay, which is a dark net. I think it's like a Silk Road, or I guess there's been so many different Silk Road, variations since then, but it was a dark web marketplace for the purchase and sale of drugs. So, so they weren't taking, KYC information. They certainly weren't registered with any financial crimes enforcement network. And so they were just allowing people on the dark net to send money back and forth from this Alpha Bay to Helix, and then they would take custody of the coins, mix them to obscure or obfuscate the fact that they came from the dark web, and then send it back to the individual. So, so I guess from a KYC perspective, they certainly weren't collecting the information necessary for that. And another thing, that you and I kind of talked about in it was whether someone who is a FinCEN exchanger, so once they're already registered with FinCEN and, complying and collecting the necessary KYC information about each person who's conducting the transaction, do they have to use blockchain analysis software? And are those blockchain analysis softwares reliable?
Sure. So this is definitely a controversial subject, at least to me, and I know to many other people as well. I mean, the law doesn't say that you need to use blockchain analysis software. The law really doesn't even mention blockchain. It's only FinCEN's guidance that puts, virtual currency transactions within the realm of financial institutions at all. So they've, interpreted the laws that Congress has written and passed to include virtual currency. And then the general rule is that you need to take reasonable steps to prevent money laundering and some kind of a risk-based approach. That's it. There's been a little more guidance here and there about what, which kind of businesses are regulated and which aren't. But at least from my perspective, FinCEN doesn't really get involved in prescribing exactly what kind of methods are to be used in every situation. So the burden is on the business to do a good job at what the law says they're required to do. And whether or not that requires blockchain analysis is an issue that's going to be answered probably not by the law, at least not in America, although in Europe that may happen. They just may make it mandatory. But it's going to be up to the industry to develop standards that they're willing to accept. So to the point where, it would be considered that it's required. But I think certainly for smaller businesses, let's say Bitcoin ATMs, I don't think it's necessary, mainly because it would be too expensive, right? These kinds of software applications you get a license for it, and they're quite expensive. And if your business, let's say you're a trader on Paxful or Bitcoin ATMs or local Bitcoins, and you're dealing with, a few $100s at a time, I don't think it's justified in terms of what level of, surveillance you're required to do on your customers, because if your transactions, let's say, are all under $250, how much money laundering can people really do? It would take so much effort for a serious criminal to launder millions of dollars, $200 at a time, that they're probably just not going to do it. And so, on the other hand, if you're, let's say, a very large exchange where people are sending many, many millions of dollars, then supposedly, or I guess you could say fairly, the risks of money laundering are higher there. But that still doesn't answer the question as to whether blockchain analysis is necessary. And I think it can be useful as a targeted tool if there's already evidence that something suspicious is going on or some crime has been committed. You can use these kinds of tools to track down where it went, right? Maybe somebody's account got hacked and the coins were withdrawn from, Bittrex, and they were sent to Coinbase, right? Blockchain analysis tools would help you figure that out. Then you could call Coinbase, ask them to freeze the coins, and maybe recover them back to the person that owns them. But as they're commonly used now, it's kind of used as like a dragnet surveillance program where everyone's transactions are being recorded and monitored, all the time, and they're building kind of a big, neural net kind of map showing everybody's coins and what everyone is doing all the time, which seems like, I'm not sure that I don't know how many crimes it prevents, but it certainly shares a lot of information about individual activities that are, normal and not criminal, as I think almost everyone that uses Bitcoin is not using it for crimes. Maybe there's some small percentage, just like with dollars or any other currency. But in terms of their reliability, it's hard to say, because it's in the blockchain analysis company's financial interest to oversell the reliability of their work, right? The more reliable it is, the more people are more, likely to pay for the software, and how much they're willing to pay for it if it's more reliable. And so, they're monitoring mine and your transactions, but we don't have an opportunity to clarify on the record to show that they're accurate or not, right? They probably think that you and I are doing whatever they think we're doing, and there's no opportunity to confirm whether or not it's actually true. So they just have heuristics, like they see coins go from one place to another, and based on the spending pattern, they make an assumption that this was a self-transfer from one person to themselves, or it was to another person, or it was, for some kind of suspicious reason. But besides a couple of groups of people that are outside of these companies, but also have the ability to do chain analysis, like OXT research, there's almost nobody to really challenge them. So I don't think that their heuristics have been objectively demonstrated as being highly reliable. Not yet, at least. I mean, because just, looking at the blockchain is complicated enough beyond looking at your own transactions.
Mhm.
So it takes a lot of effort and training and tools to verify the reliability, and we're just not there yet.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think I saw Larry Cermak posted something on Twitter probably a year and a half ago now, but it was really shocking to me at the time, showing the amount of spending the IRS had made on blockchain analysis tools. So it seems like the IRS might be the number one customer of this, but then we've also seen banks requiring it. In order to give someone an account, they'll say, oh, well, you need, where's your blockchain analysis, as though it's a mandatory thing from FinCEN, when it's absolutely not mandatory that you have that on there by any FinCEN rules, as you pointed out. But I think that's, the government and then the banks are kind of some of the driving forces that are pushing these tools. And it's, and then as we're going to get into it, kind of it creates this thing called taint, and maybe you're probably better at describing what taint is, but maybe you could give that a go.
Sure. So I guess it depends who's using it, but taint is essentially a reference to, it's not a reference to anything that happens on the blockchain, right? The transactions are what they are, but it's basically the practice of treating some Bitcoin, for example, different than other Bitcoin. And so an exchange that uses tools and chain analysis tools and sees that Bitcoin are coming from somewhere that they believe are suspicious might give, some kind of different risk rating to those coins, or treat them differently than other coins which they consider safer. And so it's something that is ascribed or prescribed to certain Bitcoin versus others, not something that actually, exists on the blockchain.
Mm-hmm. And then what are the fungibility implications if a blockchain analysis, tool starts saying that certain Bitcoin have this taint on them?
Right. So fungibility, at least, as far as money goes, is meant to describe that each unit is the same as every other unit, meaning a $1 bill is just as good as any other $1 bill, right? They're both the same. They're both worth $1, and it doesn't really matter which one you have. So if you owe somebody $10, you could just give them any $10 bill. You don't have to give them the same one back, right? And that's because they're all the same. They're all fungible. And so, if exchanges treat different sets of Bitcoin as different, then Bitcoin is not as fungible. And therefore, if you start to get into a situation where somebody says that, oh, the price of this car is 1 Bitcoin, but if you send the Bitcoin from Coinbase, now it's 1.2. Or if you send it from Bittrex, it's 0.8. Or, if you send it from a miner, it's 0.5, right? It makes Bitcoin less money than it otherwise would be, considering if you believe that fungibility is a necessary quality for money, and I think most people do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And is there any way to remove the taint on a Bitcoin?
Well, you could just not believe in it, and then it's not there, right? That's one strategy. But other people may believe it, and so it'll still be there for them, right? But if the industry just doesn't use that kind of terminology or that strategy, then the issue is solved, right? But we're operating under the assumption that some people in the industry are going to use this characterization, and so we have to figure out how to deal with that. Every time you use an exchange and you deposit your coins into the exchange and then you later withdraw, you're getting new coins, right? I don't think, for the most part, don't just hold your coins in one address and then you just take them right back out of that address. When you deposit to an exchange, it gets mixed in with all of theirs, and then you can withdraw it again later. So every time you use an exchange, you're basically starting over, as far as I can tell, assuming that they haven't, flagged your deposit and froze it on the way in, right? So just using it in that way, or is a potential way. And then Another way is just using the Bitcoin for goods and services the way you normally would, because it will travel from you to, another business through like BTC Pay server or BitPay or something, and then, that person will have it and they'll sell it or they'll store it in cold storage, and it kind of keeps flowing through the system, and eventually, even if it was previously tied to some kind of illicit transaction, let's say it was in the Silk Road, but now it's been like 50 hops since then, what is anyone supposed to do with that information, right? Mm-hmm. Like maybe 50 people have had it since then, and then it's not that useful. So, first category, don't pay attention to it. Second category, just use it. Another way is to use a mixer or a tumbler, and we alluded to that already, right? There's custodial tumblers where you send them your Bitcoin, then they send you back other Bitcoin, which is basically what a normal exchange does, except that with a normal exchange, like Kraken or something, you're not sending the coins there so that you can get different ones back. You're sending it there so you could sell them or exchange them or something like that. But it's functionally the same thing. And then besides the custodial tumblers, then there's CoinJoin, which is non-custodial mixing, which effectively puts your coins together with a bunch of other people who want to make a transaction. And then by the time it gets to the destination, it's not clear where it started. And this effectively, unlinks your outputs, the destination of your Bitcoin, from the inputs, which is where the Bitcoin started.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and I guess the fear is, if I've heard people say that places like Coinbase or very popular exchanges, maybe Jen and I don't know the exact exchanges policies on these, but some people have said that the exchanges will not accept coins that have come from mixing, tumbling, or CoinJoin services, which is, because they can't determine the path, that they don't know if they're then accepting coins that might have been used on the dark web at some point, and then opening themselves up to liability. So, all the Bitcoin core or, the privacy experts in Bitcoin suggest that everyone should be using a CoinJoin with almost every transaction. But then the reality of it is the exchanges might not, count those Bitcoins. And then if it's gone through CoinJoin, it might have a higher level of taint and lower level of fungibility. So, I guess the best way is just once you stay off the exchanges, and then there's no problem.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, there's if you don't have to use an exchange, then certainly don't use it, right? But people do use them because they need to, primarily just to buy Bitcoin and occasionally to sell Bitcoin. But who does that, right? So most of the time, people need to use exchanges just to buy Bitcoin because, well, some people can earn it, right? I earn it here and there. You probably do too. But that's a privilege that we have, and it's not an option for everyone to get paid in Bitcoin. So the exchanges are necessary as far as I'm concerned, because there's big demand for people to, people who want to buy Bitcoin. But to the point about exchanges, flagging CoinJoin or tumblers, I think they definitely flag custodial tumblers because those are much more heavily associated with, the dark web and illicit transactions, because that's really how they were used and advertised. That was their purpose. As far as non-custodial, CoinJoins being flagged, we have heard reports of that from a couple of exchanges, but besides maybe BlockFi, which their CEO tweeted explicitly that they're prohibited from accepting post CoinJoin coins, I don't know that almost any other exchange has really said what exactly how they feel about this, right? We don't know what they're doing internally. Most of them are not very transparent. And so we know that the chain analysis companies can see these transactions as CoinJoins and flag them and maybe assign some risk to them, but the exchanges definitely don't have a unified policy on this. And we don't know why. We don't know why exactly yet. It might be because they don't want to upset people, they don't want to upset their customers, or they haven't figured it out, or they don't trust the metrics, or maybe the chain analysis companies are doing even better than we think they're doing, and they know everything anyway, right? Maybe they've got other methods to unwind, lots of the coin joins, and it's like people are coin joining and then depositing to the exchange thinking they're getting away with something, and the reality is that the exchange knows everything already anyway. So that seems unlikely, but it's just a possibility. But you know, it seems like this is going to be an important issue that comes up, and it's important to a lot of Bitcoiners because a lot of them care about their privacy as well, as they should. If enough people coin join, then the exchanges are pretty much not going to have a choice. You know, if 50% of transactions are coin join transactions, the exchange can't reasonably, you know, turn down half of their transactions because it's too significant. So that's a possible outcome that could happen in the future, but getting half of Bitcoiners to do anything is certainly not, you know, not an easy task.
Yes, agreed. Yeah. And from a regulatory perspective, so you mentioned custodial and non-custodial mixers or coin joins. You know, can you explain the difference from a legal perspective, what taking custody actually means for a coin join?
Sure. So, well, the short answer is that custodial exchangers are regulated by FinCEN as money services businesses almost always. If they're in the business of accepting and transmitting money, which is what custodial exchanges are doing, then they're regulated by FinCEN. Those are financial institutions or MSBs. But if it's not custodial, then they're not MSBs. That's the short answer. So if you're using a coin join company, they are not a financial institution, and they are not required to collect information about you because they don't actually have access to your money, right? When you're doing a coin join, essentially you're paying for a coordinator to prepare transactions, unsigned transactions in advance, and distribute those transactions among a group of people. And everyone that's going to sign them knows where they're going, and a few steps later, a coin join is completed. I'm skimming over the technical explanation, but you get the idea.
And I know you're a big part of the wasabi community. Would you say that's one of the better ways to do a coin join, or where should people who haven't done it before go to experiment with it? If they wanted to, you know, it's one of these things I'm not recommending or not recommending to do anything, but I think there's some better ways, safer ways to do it than others, and certainly a non-custodial mixing service is probably the way to go on this. And I believe Wasabi probably has one of the best ones out there, but I'm not that familiar with it.
Sure. So using a non-custodial piece of software is definitely preferable to custodial, right? Not your keys, not your coins. You know, everyone knows that or should know that. So if you're using something that's non-custodial and, you know, it's relatively popular and people have looked at the code, then you can feel some reasonable level of assurance that they're not going to secretly steal your money, right? That's just, you know, basic Bitcoiner stuff, right? Before you download a wallet, make sure that somebody that can read the code has looked at it, and I can't read the code. So, you know, I have to rely on some level of trust, right? Trust minimized, not trustless. As far as particular implementations, I'm not in a position to endorse or not endorse any one of them. And it's really not because I don't have opinions on it, I do, but the reality is that you have to be very sophisticated, technologically sophisticated to be able to, you know, analyze the Bitcoin transactions in the context of CoinJoin and then see which one is more effective than others, right? And people may not know, but there's quite a rivalry between Samurai Wallet and Wasabi Wallet in terms of CoinJoin. And so
was it Samurai that when I first tweeted about the the Bitcoin article, and then you linked to me several resources, was it Samurai that you were linking to maybe and not Wasabi? So I think I just got them confused. I'm sorry. That's
okay. I think it was Samurai Wallet, but the short answer is I'm not getting in the middle of anybody's rivalry. But
sure.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that just to put a cap on that is that Wasabi is a desktop wallet and Samurai is a mobile wallet. So they're different. Mm-hmm. And it depends what you're looking for. And there's plenty of information out there, you know, say, weighing the pros and cons of each, or there's plenty of information that you could dig into to try to make an informed decision yourself. But, I want to be, not just because of any rivalry, but I don't want to give anyone like advice about software when I'm not a software developer. I would just be repeating what other people told me that I thought sounded right, or what I read that I thought sounded right. People ask me about the law, I can talk about that, right? Because I can read the law and I can understand it, or at least I try. And, give somebody an informed decision based on, I don't know how many thousands of hours I've spent practicing law and going to law school and studying, right? So if I talk about the law, I'm capable of giving legal advice when people hire me. But I don't want people to confuse any expertise I have in law with software or technological expertise, right? And so it's just something that I would want to be careful about, because I'm not an expert on those things.
Sure, that's fair.
Yeah. When I get to a point where I can review the code and, understand exactly how they work and say with complete confidence that something is, safe or functions as described, I'll start giving recommendations at that point, but not before then.
Mm-hmm. And so we've kind of talked about FinCEN and the requirements there for a company. What about OFAC? What are the requirements that, or where does that fit into the mix?
Sure. So OFAC deals with sanctions that are imposed by the US government and probably other governments, or, between various national governments, right? They say that you're not allowed to do business with certain people, terrorists or criminals or whoever they put on their list, and certain countries. And so they maintain lists of people that you are not permitted to do transactions with. And if you're a financial institution, you're required to search these lists before you do a transaction with someone, which is part of the reason why you're required to know who your customer is, so that you can make sure that they're not on the list. And, something that I've been thinking about and have been starting to research just a little bit is how these kinds of requirements apply to individuals, because they apply to everyone, right? You and I don't have an affirmative obligation to do this kind of research before we take a client, and neither do most people who just run businesses. But even though we're not required to investigate this issue, we're still not allowed to do business with these countries and people. And so, who has time to search the OFAC list before they, pay their carpenter or something like that? But anyway, OFAC fits in because they do the sanctions.
Mm-hmm. And they've added Bitcoin addresses too. So it is actually, I think that the OFAC is, in my opinion, one of the scarier parts about the fungibility discussion around Bitcoin, because they added 2, and then I think 6 months later they added another couple, and then more recently, maybe just in March of 2020, I should have looked this up before our podcast, but it was very recent that they added around 20 new addresses. So is any Bitcoin in those addresses is essentially frozen, and there's no guidance that I'm aware of as to how far removed a transaction from that address is before it would be considered safe for an exchange to hold it. Perhaps it's 1 hop. I've heard Carol Van Cleef, she's an attorney that's been around this space for quite some time. I've heard her say it was up to 5 hops. I've never seen that written anywhere. I think that's just her, best practice approach to it. And I hope I'm not misquoting her there, but I think that's, this OFAC thing is a little bit of a danger, and also requiring, it really requires KYC to be taken even at $1 level of transaction for anyone that's registered with FinCEN, which, you need the name of the person to be able to search the OFAC list on it. And it's really impractical. And as you mentioned, it really does, it technically applies to all types of business transactions. Like anyone walking into a grocery store, if they're from if they're on a sanctions list, they shouldn't be allowed to even take cash and buy something at the grocery store. But that's not, it's not upheld or it's not enforced. And I haven't seen OFAC enforced very much on Bitcoin either, even though it's there as a looming threat. And certainly, every compliance program I've come across, it has to take great efforts not to be in violation of anything to do with OFAC, just making sure that you're collecting at least the person's name, so that you can do the search. Really, we should have the address too. But yeah, where do you think it's going? Like in a future of this, like how where do you think it will go in terms of how many addresses are on the OFAC list, or how much privacy is going to be enforced, or whether Bitcoin can continue to transact in some level of anonymity?
Right. Well, the OFAC Bitcoin addresses thing is interesting. I mean, I don't particularly think it's so serious, because creating a new address is very easy, right?
True.
You can create basically unlimited addresses, and you shouldn't be reusing them. And so, it's not that bad, right? They can just keep adding them, and it's not like they're going to one day add up so many that, we don't have any more left, right? I don't know what the maximum number of possible public addresses you can create with one private key is, but it's a lot. Probably hundreds of thousands, or who knows, millions, hundreds of millions. I have no idea, but it's a lot. So you can create new addresses. I don't see them putting certain addresses on the list as being a major fungibility issue. But for those Bitcoin that are in there, I mean, they can still be moved if somebody has the private keys. So I wouldn't say that I think they're frozen, because other people may be willing to take them. And there's lots of people that accept Bitcoin as payment, who aren't financial institutions, who wouldn't even know. If you had your Bitcoin on one of those addresses, and then you went and bought like a t-shirt from someone, they're not going to know that you're dealing that they got OFAC Bitcoin, because they're not a financial institution. And who checks OFAC for t-shirt sales, right? So they can still move, and then they can get mixed in with other people's coins. And then, eventually the record is just not clear enough to blame anybody for anything, I think. As far as the hops go, it would be nice if 5 hops cleared your Bitcoin, but I'm not sure that that's the case. And the reason why is because it's really easy to create hops. I could just take all my Bitcoin right now and just send it 5 times in a row. And then on the 6th time, just send it back to myself. Now I've created 5 hops, I don't think that solves the problem on its own, because, I mean, like I said, it would be great if it did. I hope they do that. But from what I've heard, the analysis companies are basically, the only hops they care about are the hops between addresses that they know. So let's say you withdraw your Bitcoin from Coinbase, and then it hops around 25 times. They don't care about that. They just want to know next time it hits an exchange that they know the address to, like it ends up at Kraken. Now they'll say, okay, we've got Coinbase person A, and we've got Kraken, either person A, the same person, or person B. And so they're trying to get around this, create some hops for anonymity situation. But I don't know how effective they are at that. And as more people begin to coin join, and as other technologies, develop, the technology, I think, is always going to be ahead of the regulators and ahead of the surveillance teams. It's just the way it is, and I think the way it should be. But I'm not sure what's going to happen with how many hops it takes to clear the Bitcoin for the reasons that I mentioned.
Mm-hmm. One of my friends pointed out one fail-safe way to clear the Bitcoin is to have the U.S. government or some government agency seize it, and once it goes into their possession and then they auction it off, then it's the same as coming from a miner. It's very safe.
Right. Right. Well, in terms of I think in terms of if the government is the one that you're worried about, then getting it from them is a safe way to do it. But obviously that's not practical for most people. And I'm not sure that they're even auctioning off any at the moment. Mm-hmm. Though they did sell some before, after the Silk Road, right? Maybe there have been batches after that, but those are the last ones that I remember. Mm-hmm. Silk Road, maybe, I think those, or maybe Mount Gox. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I wonder if they seized, I'm pretty sure they seized a lot of Bitcoin in this Helix case too. So we'll see
Oh,
what
that's
happens
true.
with that.
Right. And some other recent, yeah, some other cases like that.
But oh well, Rafael, this has been a great discussion. I really appreciate your input on this, on the privacy stuff. It's a topic that, you know, I haven't come across too many lawyers that really know the ins and outs of it like you do. So I really appreciate your taking the time to talk to us about it. Where can people find you if they want to, you know, hire you for some work, or what kind of clients are you interested in working with as well?
Sure, I appreciate that, and yes, happy to be here and happy to talk to you about it. And I thought that, you know, I probably wouldn't have written our article by myself, so I don't want to downplay your contribution. It was your article before it was our article, and so it was good to have the motivation to do it
Well,
with
it got a lot
someone
better
else.
once you came into the documents. So
I appreciate that. So in terms of where to find me, if you Google crypto lawyer, my website is thecryptolawyers.com, but if you Google crypto lawyer, it should be easy to find from there. Google's blessed me with a good position. And you can find me on Twitter, CA Crypto Lawyer. And in terms of clients that I'm interested in taking, I mean, you know, I do this kind of Bank Secrecy Act, FinCEN work, and also deal with state money transmitter licenses or SEC investigations or litigation or disputes with exchanges. Various kinds of work. I'm happy to talk to people, and if I don't know the right attorney, if I'm not the right attorney to help them, I'll almost definitely know the right attorney, and happy to refer them to that person.
Awesome, excellent. Well, thank you so much, and we appreciate your time, and look forward to, you know, maybe our next article. Who knows when that will be? But
I agree. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Rafael. Have a great day.
You too.